The woman who raised me had been dead for 5 days when my stepfather decided to bury me beside her without a coffin, without a prayer, and without leaving a single fingerprint on the shovel. He waited until Eleanor Hart's portrait was glowing on the screen behind the podium, waited until 300 people in black coats had gone silent under the chandeliers of the Charleston Maritime Hall, waited until donors, reporters, board members, volunteers, warehouse drivers, storm survivors, and every person who had ever believed Hartwell Relief Foundation was built on mercy had turned their eyes toward the stage. Then Martin Vale stepped into the light, placed one hand over his heart like a grieving husband, and said my name as if it were evidence. "Before we discuss Eleanor's successor," he began, his voice breaking in exactly the right place, "there is something painful but necessary that this room must know about Amelia." My fingers tightened around the lighthouse key in my pocket. It was small, brass, warm from my hand, and for one foolish second I thought of my mother's voice, low and steady in the back room of the relief warehouse 6 months earlier, telling me that if the day ever came when everyone turned against me, I was not to run. I was to stand still and let the truth arrive. But standing still is not easy when the person destroying you is smiling through fake tears. Behind Martin, Eleanor's face filled the screen. Silver hair swept back, blue eyes bright. The same eyes that had found me when I was 6 years old, soaked through in a Red Cross shelter after Hurricane Celia, refusing to answer to any name because the storm had taken the people who used to say it. Eleanor had knelt in front of me with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of soup in her hand, and she had not asked where I belonged. She had simply said, "You can sit with me until you remember." 28 years later, I was standing in a memorial service built in her honor, and the man she had married was about to tell Charleston that I had stolen from the very people she taught me to protect. "This foundation," Martin continued, looking over the crowd with the calm sorrow of a man who had rehearsed in a mirror, "has served families after floods, hurricanes, house fires, and evacuations. Eleanor gave her life to it. She trusted people deeply, sometimes too deeply." A murmur moved through the room. Paige stood beside him in a fitted black dress, one hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes dry but shining under the lights. She was Martin's daughter, Eleanor's stepdaughter, and the only person I knew who could make cruelty look like heartbreak. She looked toward me then, not with pity, not with grief, but with the small, private satisfaction of someone watching a door lock from the inside. I should have known the arrangement of the room was wrong the moment I arrived. My seat had not been in the front row with family. It had been 3 rows back, between 2 junior coordinators who would not look at me. My name had been removed from the printed program, though I had written half of Eleanor's emergency response manuals and slept on warehouse floors during more storms than I could count. The board table had been set up beneath the stage like a courtroom bench. Martin's attorney was there, so was the foundation's interim accountant. 2 local reporters sat near the aisle with their recorders already glowing red. Even the tribute video had skipped the photographs of Eleanor and me at supply drives, ribbon cuttings, flooded neighborhoods, and Christmas toy deliveries. It showed Eleanor with governors, pastors, CEOs, and Martin. It showed Paige handing bottled water to a child once, a child whose name she never remembered. But it did not show me. I had been erased before Martin ever opened his mouth. "Amelia," he said, and the room turned toward me so sharply I felt the air move. "Has been part of Eleanor's life for many years. No one denies that. My wife had a generous heart. She believed broken things could be restored." Paige lowered her eyes. Someone in the second row whispered, "Oh no." Martin inhaled as if what came next wounded him. But in the final months of Eleanor's life, serious financial irregularities were discovered inside Hartwell Relief Foundation. Funds intended for coastal families after Hurricane Mercer were diverted through unauthorized approvals. Vendor payments were made to accounts that cannot be verified. Emergency supply orders were signed digitally by one person. He turned fully toward me. Amelia Hart. For a moment, the room became so quiet that I could hear the flags outside snapping against their poles in the harbor wind. My own heartbeat seemed to travel up my throat. I wanted to speak, but the shock stole the shape of words from my mouth. Above Martin, Eleanor's portrait looked down at us, and I hated that he had chosen this place, this day, this hour, while her ashes still sat in a white urn beneath a wreath of seagrass and lilies at the front of the room. He had not waited for mourning to end because mourning was the weapon. "That is not true," I said, but my voice came out softer than I needed it to. Martin closed his eyes briefly, as if my denial hurt him more than the accusation hurt me. "I wish it were not true." He nodded toward the technician at the side of the stage. The screen changed. Eleanor's smile vanished, replaced by a spreadsheet projected 20 feet high. Columns of numbers appeared under the foundation logo: disbursements, vendor codes, storm response allocations, approval stamps. My name was highlighted in yellow again and again. Amelia Hart, Amelia Hart, Amelia Hart. The crowd shifted. A board member named Celeste Monroe pressed her hand to her pearls. One of the warehouse drivers, Luis, stared at the screen with his lips parted. I saw Pastor Green lean toward the woman beside him and whisper something I could not hear. Every highlighted line felt like a stone dropped onto my chest. I recognized the formatting. I recognized the old vendor codes. But I also recognized something wrong, something so precise it made my skin go cold. The approval timestamps were from the 2 weeks after Eleanor died, when Martin had ordered my system access suspended for administrative transition. "You locked me out," I said, louder now. "Those approvals were made after my credentials were frozen." Paige stepped forward before Martin could answer. "Amelia, please." Her voice trembled beautifully. "Do not make this uglier than it already is." Then she turned to the room, and for the first time, she let one tear fall. Just one. Controlled. Perfect. My mother loved her. We all know that. She brought Amelia into our home, gave her a name, gave her an education, gave her everything. And this is how she was repaid. A low sound moved across the hall, not quite outrage yet, not quite belief, but close enough that my hands began to shake. My mother. Paige had called Eleanor my mother only when it served the knife. For years she had corrected people with a smile, saying, technically, Amelia was adopted. She had introduced me as Eleanor's rescue project, to donors who laughed awkwardly because they thought she was joking. She had told volunteers that I was emotionally attached to the storm work because of my background, as if trauma made me useful but not trustworthy. Now, in front of cameras, she claimed Eleanor as mother, and cast me as the orphan who stole from her. "I never took a cent from this foundation," I said. "Every transaction I flagged, every missing shipment, every vendor discrepancy, I documented because Eleanor asked me to." Martin's head snapped toward me so quickly that most people missed it, but I did not. For 1 second the grief mask slipped, and beneath it was fear. Then he recovered. "Eleanor was ill near the end," he said gently. "She was confused. Protective of you beyond reason. We have tried to handle this privately, but the sums are too large, and the damage to the foundation too severe." He lifted a folder from the podium. "The preliminary total is $1.87 million. Gasps broke out across the room. Someone said my name like a question. Luis looked away. Celeste Monroe stood halfway from her chair and sat back down. The number was monstrous enough to make innocence sound ridiculous. That was the genius of it. If Martin had accused me of stealing $20,000, people might have wondered why. But nearly $2 million? That kind of number did not invite questions. It created a spectacle. It turned grief into scandal, and suspicion into certainty. Paige walked toward the edge of the stage, her eyes fixed on me. "Amelia, for Eleanor's sake, please do the decent thing. Step away from the foundation before law enforcement has to become involved." There it was, the offer wrapped in mercy. Disappear quietly, or be dragged publicly. I could feel every person in the room waiting for my answer. A reporter raised his phone higher. Martin's attorney opened a leather folder. The board chair, Walter Hensley, cleared his throat and looked at me with the uncomfortable pity of a man who had already chosen the safer side. "Amelia," he said, "given the seriousness of the documents presented, I believe it may be best if you remove yourself from today's succession discussion until an independent review can be completed." "Independent?" I repeated. "By whom? The accountant Martin hired after Eleanor died? The attorney who did not even speak to me before putting my name on a theft report?" Walter's face hardened. "This is not the time for accusations." A laugh almost escaped me then, sharp and broken. Not the time. It was never the time when the truth belonged to the person without power. Martin could accuse me under my mother's portrait. Paige could humiliate me in front of the people I had worked beside for years. A board could move to strip my position during a memorial service, but if I defended myself, I was making a scene. I looked around the room, searching for one face that still believed me. Some looked ashamed. Some looked hungry for the drama. Some looked afraid of being seen on the wrong side. Then my eyes landed on the white urn beneath Eleanor's wreath, and the panic inside me shifted into something heavier. Not calm, not courage, something older than both. I remembered Eleanor's hand covering mine over a stack of shipping invoices in the warehouse office. I remembered her saying, "When thieves steal from charity, they do not only steal money, they steal the reason good people keep giving." I remembered the brass key sliding across the desk. I remembered Nathaniel Cross's name. "Trust him if the room turns cold." The room was ice now. Walter rose fully. "The board will take an emergency vote to suspend Amelia Hart from all foundation duties pending investigation and to appoint Martin Vale as acting executive director." Page's shoulders softened with relief. Martin bowed his head, pretending the responsibility pained him. Around the board table, hands moved toward pens, tablets, folders. My entire life with Eleanor was being reduced to a motion, a second, a vote. I opened my mouth, though I did not know what I could say that would matter against forged documents and polished grief. Then the doors at the back of the Maritime Hall opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the hinges to cut through the room like a warning. Every head turned. An older black man in a charcoal suit stepped inside, carrying a weathered leather briefcase in one hand and a sealed gray evidence box in the other. Nathaniel Cross had been Eleanor's attorney for 23 years. The only person in Charleston who could make silence feel like a legal document. He walked down the center aisle without hurrying, his eyes never leaving Martin. The board chair froze. Page's face drained so quickly that her makeup looked suddenly too bright. Martin's hand tightened around the podium. Nathaniel reached the front of the room, set the sealed box on the board table, and spoke in a voice calm enough to terrify everyone who had something to hide. "Before anyone casts a vote," he said, "Eleanor Hart left instructions for this exact moment. If Amelia was ever publicly accused of stealing from this foundation, I was to open this box in front of the full board, the donors, and the press." He placed one palm on the lid. The red wax seal bore Eleanor's lighthouse mark. "And Martin," Nathaniel said, turning slightly toward my stepfather, "she specifically told me you would be the one to force my hand. I was 6 years old the first time Eleanor Hart saved my life, though for years she insisted I had saved hers first. Hurricane Celia had torn through the South Carolina coast like a living thing, ripping roofs from houses, folding docks into the harbor, dragging cars into ditches, and turning entire neighborhoods into fields of brown water and broken furniture. I remembered only pieces of it clearly. The sound of rain hitting windows so hard it seemed angry, my mother's hand squeezing mine until her ring cut into my skin, my father shouting over the wind, a door slamming open, then darkness, water, sirens, and the strange white brightness of a shelter gymnasium where strangers moved like ghosts under emergency lights. By the time Eleanor found me, I had stopped speaking. The volunteers had written "unidentified female child," approximately 6, on a clipboard because I would not say my name, would not answer when they asked where my parents were, would not cry when a nurse cleaned the cut on my forehead. I sat on a folded blanket near the wall, holding one wet sneaker in my lap, watching families reunite and break apart around me. People knelt in front of me all day with soft voices and careful smiles, asking questions I could not survive answering. Then Eleanor came in wearing rubber boots, a raincoat streaked with mud, and pearl earrings that looked absurdly elegant in the middle of disaster. She was not yet the famous founder of Hartwell Relief Foundation then, not to me. She was simply a woman carrying a tray of soup cups and calling everyone sweetheart without making it sound cheap. She stopped when she saw me. She did not ask my name. She did not ask where my parents were. She lowered herself onto the floor beside me, set a cup of soup between us, and said, "You can sit with me until you remember." For the first time since the water took everything, no one demanded that I explain my grief before they gave me kindness. I did not drink the soup. I did not speak. But when she stood to leave 3 hours later, I grabbed the sleeve of her raincoat and would not let go. That was the beginning of us. The official story came later. Foster placement, emergency guardianship, adoption paperwork, court signatures, newspaper photographs of a wealthy Charleston widow taking in a storm orphan. People loved that version because it was clean. It had a beginning, a wound, a rescuer, and a happy ending. The truth was messier and more beautiful. Eleanor did not rescue me once. She rescued me every morning for years. She rescued me when thunder made me crawl under the dining room table at 11 years old. She rescued me when teachers called me withdrawn, when girls at school whispered that I was charity, when I ripped up my own adoption certificate because I thought paper love could be canceled. She rescued me by refusing to let tragedy become my only story. You were not made by the storm. she told me whenever the nightmares returned. You were carried through it. She gave me her name, but more than that, she gave me work. Every Saturday, while other children slept late or watched cartoons, Eleanor took me to the Hartwell warehouse near the harbor. Back then, it was one metal building with a leaking roof, 2 used forklifts, and shelves stacked with bottled water, tarps, diapers, canned food, generators, blankets, and cleaning supplies. She taught me how to read inventory sheets before I could multiply properly. She taught me why baby formula had to be separated by expiration date, why batteries could not sit in heat, why one missing pallet after a hurricane could mean one neighborhood waiting an extra day in the dark. Relief is not charity, she would say, walking the aisles with a clipboard tucked under her arm. Relief is a promise. People give because they believe someone honest will carry that promise the last mile. By the time I was 17, I knew every truck route along the coast. By 24, I could coordinate emergency deliveries faster than most paid logistics teams. By 30, I was officially Hartwell Relief Foundation's operations director, though Eleanor still called me her lighthouse girl because, as she put it, I had a stubborn habit of standing where storms were worst and refusing to go out. Martin Vale entered our lives during the quiet season, which should have warned me. Men like Martin rarely walked in while the wind was screaming and the work was dirty. They arrived afterward, when the press photos were framed and the checks were large. He met Eleanor at a donor's dinner in Savannah, a silver-haired consultant with old Southern manners, polished shoes, and a gift for making powerful women feel both admired and needed. He spoke about sustainability, legacy planning, expansion, national partnerships. Eleanor, who could stare down a governor but still forgot to eat when she was worried about flood victims, found him charming. I found him practiced. The first time she brought him to Sunday dinner, he kissed her cheek, praised the house, asked thoughtful questions about the foundation, and looked at me just a second too long before smiling. Amelia, he said, as though testing how my name tasted. Eleanor has told me so much about you. I hope some of it was true, I replied. He laughed, but his eyes did not change. Paige came with him 3 months later, home from whatever private college she had decided was temporarily beneath her. She was 22 then, beautiful in a sharp, expensive way, with hair so smooth it seemed untouched by weather, and a voice that could turn warm or cold depending on who was listening. In front of Eleanor, she called me her new sister and asked if I would show her the warehouse. In private, standing between shelves of storm supplies, she ran one manicured finger across a dusty box of work gloves and said, "So this is your whole personality?" I remember staring at her, unsure whether to laugh. Helping people? Being useful, she said. There is a difference. After Eleanor and Martin married, the differences became smaller in public and sharper in private. Martin never openly insulted me. He did not have to. He simply began referring to me as operational staff in meetings where Eleanor called me her daughter. He suggested I was too emotionally connected to disaster zones to make strategic decisions. He encouraged the board to separate family sentiment from foundation governance. Paige started appearing at donor luncheons in dresses that cost more than a generator, speaking tearfully about Mom's mission, though she had never packed a relief box without photographers nearby. When Eleanor was in the room, they praised my dedication. When she was not, they treated my history like a stain on the furniture. You have to understand, Paige told me once after a gala, while volunteers loaded leftover food into vans outside. Blood matters to people who build legacies. It may be unfair, but it is true. I said. Eleanor built this foundation to prove the opposite. Paige smiled. That is what she says. I told myself Eleanor did not see it because she wanted peace in her home. I was wrong. Eleanor saw almost everything. She saw Martin's careful questions about donor-restricted funds. She saw Paige's sudden interest in vendor contracts. She saw how old board members began receiving private dinners, how staff who challenged Martin were reassigned, how invoices from new logistics partners moved through the system faster than medical supply orders. 6 months before she died, she called me to the warehouse after midnight. The harbor fog was thick that night, pressing against the loading bay doors, turning the security lights into pale halos. Eleanor stood in the office with her coat still on and 3 bankers' boxes open on the desk. She looked older than I had ever seen her. Not weak exactly, but tired in a way sleep would not fix. I need you to listen carefully, she said. Do not interrupt, and do not try to protect me from what I already know. She showed me invoices from Harborline Logistics, a vendor I had never approved. She showed me storm response funds routed through emergency authorization codes, supply orders that had no corresponding delivery receipts, and digital approvals attached to internal accounts that should not have had access. "Someone is bleeding the foundation," she said. "And whoever it is understands our system." My first thought was Martin. My second was Paige. My third was fear, because Eleanor was watching my face as if she had thought the same things and hated herself for it. "Why not go to the board?" I asked. "Because I do not yet know how many of them have been flattered, frightened, or bought." She reached into her coat pocket and placed a brass key on the desk between us. Its handle was shaped like the Hartwell Lighthouse emblem. "From tonight on, you document everything. Quietly. No accusations. No heroics. You report only to me and to Nathaniel Cross if I cannot be reached." "Cannot be reached?" My voice cracked. "Mom, what are you not telling me?" She covered my hand with hers. "I am telling you enough to keep you alive and not enough to make you careless. For the next 6 months, I lived 2 lives. By day, I ran supply schedules, attended meetings, smiled through Paige's little cuts, and listened to Martin speak about transparency, while he built walls around every account that mattered. By night, I checked shipment numbers against fuel logs, photographed altered invoices, copied server activity, and followed money through shell vendors with names that sounded coastal and trustworthy. Eleanor grew more urgent. She stopped leaving documents in her office. She began carrying a leather notebook everywhere. Once, I found her standing alone in the warehouse aisle before dawn, one hand on a pallet of bottled water, crying silently. When she saw me, she wiped her face and said, "Promise me something. If I am gone before this is finished, you will not let them make you ashamed of being chosen." I wanted to argue with the word gone. Instead, I promised. The last night I saw her alive, rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. Nothing like the hurricane rain of my childhood, but enough to make the old fear stir. Eleanor had made tea and left it untouched. Papers were spread across the table, but she kept looking toward the hallway as if the house itself might be listening. "I found the link," she whispered. "Harborline is not independent. It traces back to someone inside the family." My stomach tightened. "Martin?" She opened her mouth, then stopped because her phone lit up on the table. The screen showed his name. Martin Vale. Eleanor's face changed so completely that I felt the room drop beneath me. She snatched up the phone but did not answer. "Go home," she said. "Now." "Mom, Amelia, please." It was the only time in my life Eleanor had ever sounded afraid of someone living under her own roof. I left because she asked me to, because I trusted her, because I still believed we had more time. 4 days later, she was dead. And the first call I received was not from Martin, not from Paige, not from any board member. It was from Nathaniel Cross, his voice low and careful, telling me Eleanor had left instructions, and that when the room turned cold, I was to remember the key. For 6 months, I learned how theft sounds when it hides inside charity. It does not sound like a gunshot or a broken window. It sounds like a printer running after midnight, like a server fan humming in a locked office, like a polite email marked urgent, like a board member saying, "This is just temporary," while avoiding your eyes. At Hartwell Relief Foundation, every dollar had a destination. Every pallet had a route. Every emergency fund had a family waiting at the end of it, and Eleanor had taught me to hear when the rhythm changed. The first wrong note was Harborline Logistics. On paper, it looked harmless, even helpful. A regional transport partner with coastal experience, fast deployment capacity, storm-certified drivers, and discounted emergency rates. The vendor file was clean, the insurance documents current, the tax forms complete. Too complete. Real disaster vendors were always a little messy because real disaster work was messy. Drivers missed signatures because roads washed out. Warehouse staff corrected counts by hand. Volunteers wrote dates backward after 18-hour shifts. Harborline's paperwork looked like it had been made by someone who understood compliance better than transportation. No mud, no delays, no driver notes, no damaged goods reports, no human fingerprints anywhere. The first night Eleanor asked me to investigate, I sat alone in the warehouse office until nearly 3 a.m, comparing Harborline's invoices against our fuel logs and delivery confirmations. 3 shipments billed to Barrier Island communities had never left our South Dock. 2 pallets of portable generators were marked delivered to a church shelter that had closed 2 weeks earlier. A refrigerated medical supply order had been charged twice, once under storm response and once under emergency senior care. The amounts were small enough to escape quick review, large enough to bleed us slowly. That was when I understood the thief was patient. Whoever was doing this was not grabbing money and running. They were building a tunnel under the foundation, one invoice at a time. I documented everything the way Eleanor taught me: date, source, discrepancy, supporting file, backup location. I kept one copy on an encrypted drive hidden inside the hollow base of an old lighthouse model in my apartment. I kept another in a password-protected cloud folder under a name, so boring no one would open it unless they loved tax policy. And every Thursday night, after the warehouse emptied and the last forklift beep faded into the dark, I met Eleanor in the back office and showed her what I had found. She never looked surprised, which frightened me more than panic would have. She would put on her reading glasses, study each page, circle details with a red pen, and ask the same question in different ways. Who benefits, who approved, who had access, who needed Amelia to look careless? At first, I thought she was warning me to be careful with my own credentials. Then Martin started mentioning my access in meetings. "We need stronger controls around operational approvals," he said one morning, his hand resting on Eleanor's chair though she was sitting right there. "Amelia has carried too much alone for too long. It is unfair to her and risky for the foundation." The board nodded because it sounded reasonable. Paige leaned back in her chair and gave me a little smile over the rim of her coffee cup. 2 days later, my administrative permissions were reduced. A week after that, certain vendor records required executive clearance. Then the emergency disbursement dashboard disappeared from my login entirely. Each change came wrapped in concern. Martin said he was protecting me from overwork. Paige said the foundation was growing beyond warehouse habits. The interim accountant, a pale, nervous man named Russell Keene, said new protocols were standard for organizations of our size. I watched doors closing around me and pretended not to hear the locks. That was the hardest part. Not the late nights, not the fear, not even Paige's insults. The hardest part was acting unaware while people rewrote the floor beneath my feet. I still loaded trucks. I still answered calls from flooded counties. I still walked donors through supply rows and explained why unrestricted funds mattered. I still listened while Martin praised transparency at luncheons, knowing his signature appeared near transactions that made no operational sense. I wanted to confront him so badly that some days my teeth ached from holding the words in. But Eleanor had been clear. No accusations without the full chain. Martin was not stupid. He had survived for years by letting other people stand closer to the fire. If I moved too early, he would sacrifice Russell, blame a system error, and make me look unstable. So I kept digging. The first real break came from a driver named Terrence, who had worked for us since I was in college. He pulled me aside behind the loading dock one evening, while rainwater dripped from the roof, gutters, and volunteers sealed boxes of hygiene kits inside the warehouse. "Miss Amelia," he said quietly, "you know I do not like gossip." "Then do not gossip," I said. "Tell me a fact." He glanced toward the security camera mounted above the bay door. "Fact is, Harborline trucks been showing up after hours, but they are not Harborline trucks. No logo. Temporary plates. Same 2 men each time. They load from Bay 3 when Mr. Vale is here." My stomach tightened. "You saw Martin?" "Twice. Miss Paige once." He looked ashamed, as if witnessing betrayal made him part of it. I figured maybe it was special donor stuff. But last week I checked a manifest after they left. Said 20 pallets went to Street Bartholomew Parish. I called my cousin there. They got 6. I wanted to hug him and warn him in the same breath. Instead, I asked him to write down dates and times, and say nothing to anyone. That night, I pulled camera logs from the backup security portal Eleanor had insisted we maintain years before, back when a supplier dispute taught her never to trust a single system. The current footage had been overwritten, but the backup still held compressed clips. There they were, 2 unmarked trucks. Bay 3 open after midnight. Paige walking in wearing white sneakers and a raincoat. Martin speaking to Russell near the office door. A forklift carrying shrink-wrapped pallets into the dark. I watched the footage 3 times, my hands trembling so hard I kept missing the pause button. It was not enough for prosecution by itself, but it was enough to prove the lie had a body. The second break came from Paige's arrogance. She loved convenience more than caution. Harborline's public registration led nowhere useful, but one of its payment accounts used a recovery email connected to a boutique consulting firm Paige had created in college and apparently forgotten to bury. I followed that thread through state business filings, donor event reimbursements, and a private mailbox registered to an office suite that did not exist. Harborline was not a vendor, it was a funnel. Money left the foundation as emergency logistics payments, bounced through shell subcontractors, and reappeared as consulting fees, property deposits, and one luxury condo reservation under a name Paige used for social media. When I showed Eleanor, she took off her glasses and pressed both hands flat against the desk. For several seconds, she did not move. "It is them," I said, because saying it gently would not make it less true. Her mouth tightened. "I know." The words hit me strangely. Not as confirmation, but as grief. How long? Long enough to feel ashamed I loved someone who could stand beside hungry families and calculate what their suffering was worth. She turned toward the warehouse window, where rows of supplies waited under fluorescent lights. "But shame is not evidence, Amelia. Evidence is how we protect the people they stole from." After that, Eleanor changed. She became careful in visible ways and reckless in hidden ones. She invited Martin to more meetings, not fewer. She let Paige speak at donor events. She praised Russell in front of staff. All the while she built something quietly with Nathaniel Cross. I did not know what. She would not tell me. "Compartmentalization keeps people alive," she said when I pushed. "You know your part. Nathaniel knows his. I know mine." Then she made me memorize 3 instructions. If she died suddenly, I was not to accept any settlement from Martin. If I was removed from the building, I was not to surrender my personal devices without a warrant. If I was accused publicly, I was to stay in the room until Nathaniel arrived. At the time, the instructions seemed dramatic, almost theatrical. Then came the morning Eleanor did not answer her phone. Martin called the staff together at noon. His eyes red, his voice hushed. Paige sobbing into a tissue beside him. "Stroke," he said. "Peaceful," he said. "Nothing could be done," he said. Within 48 hours, my foundation email password failed. My office badge stopped opening the finance wing. Russell sent a formal notice saying all operational records were under executive review. Martin told me to take bereavement leave. Paige sent flowers to my apartment with a card that read, "Rest. Mom would want peace now." I threw the card in the trash and spent the night checking every backup I still had access to. That was when I saw it. A batch of approvals stamped with my digital signature at 2:14 a.m., 2:19 a.m., and 2:27 a.m., 3 days after Eleanor died, authorizing final payments to Harborline Logistics. I had been asleep in my apartment. My credentials had supposedly been frozen. Whoever forged the approvals wanted them discovered, but not yet. They were planting the weapon they planned to put in my hand. The next morning, 2 financial crimes investigators arrived at the foundation asking for me by name. Martin met them in the lobby before I could. Paige stood behind him, pale and perfect, one hand on his arm. Russell would not look at me. I remember the investigators' badges catching the light, as one of them said they had received documentation connecting me to diverted storm funds. I remember every employee in the lobby going still. And I remember Martin's face most of all, full of sorrow for the audience, but with something else hidden beneath it, something cold and satisfied, as if he had just watched the trap close exactly where he had set it. By noon, my name was no longer a name. It was a headline, a rumor, a search term, a whispered warning passed between donors who had once hugged me in flooded church basements and now crossed the street when they saw me coming. Local news did not wait for an indictment, or proof, or even the courtesy of a phone call before running the story. Adopted daughter of Hartwell founder, questioned in relief fund scandal. They used a photograph of me from 3 years earlier, taken after 72 hours without sleep during Hurricane Isla, my hair pulled back, my face pale, my jacket streaked with mud. Under that photo, they wrote the words, "Suspected misuse of funds." And by evening, the internet had done what storms do best. It took something already damaged and scattered it beyond recognition. People said I had always seemed too close to Eleanor's accounts. People said adoption made gratitude complicated. People said no one trusted family more than they should, and maybe Eleanor Hart had been too kind for her own good. I sat on the floor of my apartment with my laptop open, and my phone face down beside me, listening to it vibrate again and again across the wood like an insect trapped under glass. I did not answer. I could not bear to hear pity, accusation, or the careful distance people use when they are afraid loyalty might become contagious. The investigators had not arrested me that morning. They had asked questions in a conference room while Martin stood outside the glass wall, pretending not to watch. They wanted to know why my credentials appeared on payments to Harbor Line Logistics. They wanted to know why the final approvals were made after Eleanor's death. They wanted to know whether I had personal relationships with any contractors connected to storm response funds. I answered everything I could. I told them my access had been restricted. I told them I had been documenting discrepancies under Eleanor's direction. I told them the signatures were not mine. The approvals were not mine. The theft was not mine. They listened without cruelty, which was almost worse, because professional neutrality looks a lot like disbelief when your life is collapsing. When I offered to show them backup files, one investigator, Agent Maribel Stone, leaned forward slightly and said, "Do not destroy, alter, or move anything connected to this investigation." "I am trying to help you," I said. "Then preserve what you have," she replied. "And be careful who knows you have it." That warning stayed with me longer than the questions. Be careful who knows you have it. By the time I returned to my apartment, my building doorman would not meet my eyes. A donor's wife had left a voicemail saying she was praying I would confess before more families were hurt. A former volunteer texted, "I hope this is not true," which somehow hurt more than if she had said she believed it was. Then Martin called. I let it ring until it stopped. He called again, then Paige, then Martin's attorney. Finally, a message appeared from Paige. "This can still end quietly if you stop making it worse." 10 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a courier holding a cream-colored envelope embossed with the Hartwell Relief Foundation seal, as if theft wore nicer stationery when it came from inside the family. I opened the door only wide enough to take it. Inside was a settlement proposal titled Voluntary Separation and Confidentiality Agreement. The language was clean, sterile, and murderous. I would resign all positions within the foundation. I would surrender foundation property, including devices, access cards, files, and any copied records. I would agree not to speak publicly about Eleanor's death, internal finances, Martin Vale, Paige Vale, Harbor Line Logistics, or any board proceedings. In exchange, Martin would recommend restraint to the board and encourage civil rather than criminal recovery where possible. At the bottom, attached with a silver paperclip, was a handwritten note from Paige. "Amelia, this is mercy. Take it before people stop feeling sorry for you." I read that sentence 3 times before I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the body sometimes chooses the wrong exit for grief. Mercy. They had stolen from storm victims, forged my name, poisoned Eleanor's memorial, and now they wanted applause for offering me a blindfold before they pushed me off the roof. I tore the note in half, then stopped myself from tearing the agreement because Nathaniel's voice rose in my memory. "Preserve everything." I photographed every page, sealed the original in a plastic sleeve, and placed it beside the brass lighthouse key on my kitchen table. The key looked impossibly small next to the document that was supposed to end my life. For the first time since the accusation, I wanted Eleanor so badly that it became physical. I wanted to call her and hear her say, "Start at the beginning, lighthouse girl." I wanted to hear the scratch of her pen as she took notes, the quiet fury she never wasted on shouting. Instead, my apartment held only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant roll of thunder over Charleston Harbor. That night, the rain came. Not a hurricane, not even a dangerous storm, just a steady coastal rain that turned windows silver and made the city smell like salt, pavement, and old wood. I tried to sleep and failed. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lobby again. Investigators at the front desk, employees frozen in place, Martin's sorrowful face, Paige's hand on his arm. Around 2 a.m, my phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me answered. "Street Bridges," a man said. "Side entrance, 20 minutes. Bring the key." The call ended. I did not need him to identify himself. Nathaniel Cross had the kind of voice that carried its own signature. Street Bridges was an old stone church near the harbor, half hidden between a closed seafood market and a row of live oaks that had survived more storms than any of us deserved. Eleanor used to hold supply briefings in its basement when the foundation was still too poor to rent proper space. I drove there with the settlement agreement in my bag, and the lighthouse key clenched in my fist. The city was nearly empty, streets shining black under the rain, traffic lights swinging over intersections like watchful eyes. Nathaniel was waiting under the side awning in a dark overcoat, his hat brim beaded with water. He unlocked the parish hall without a word and led me inside. The basement smelled of dust, candle wax, and old coffee. Folding chairs were stacked along the wall. A bulletin board still held a faded flyer from a food drive Eleanor had organized years ago. Seeing her name there almost undid me. Nathaniel noticed, but gave me the dignity of not softening his voice. "Show me what they sent." I handed him the agreement. He read it once, then again, his expression growing colder with every page. "They are moving faster than Eleanor expected." "You knew?" I asked. The question came out sharper than I meant it to. "You knew they would do this to me?" "I knew Eleanor feared they would." "And you did not warn me?" He looked up. "I am warning you now." "Now?" I stepped back from the table. "After my name is on the news? After investigators walked into the foundation? After Martin accused me in front of staff and Paige sent me a confession trap disguised as mercy?" Nathaniel removed his glasses and folded them slowly. "If I had opened Eleanor's sealed evidence before they accused you publicly, Martin would have claimed we fabricated a defense because you were under suspicion. If Eleanor had confronted him privately, he would have destroyed records, blamed Russell, and isolated her further. If you had confronted him, he would have done exactly what he is doing now, only sooner, with less evidence preserved." Eleanor understood something painful, Amelia. Some traps can only close after the predator steps fully inside. I hated the sense in his words. I hated that Eleanor had known pain could be used as timing. I hated most that she had been right. Nathaniel reached into his briefcase and removed a photocopied envelope, sealed in clear archival plastic. Eleanor's handwriting crossed the front. "To be opened only if they accuse Amelia before the board." Under that, in smaller letters, she had written, "Do not rescue her too early. Trust her strength." My breath caught so hard it hurt. She wrote that? 6 weeks before she died. What is in the real envelope? A letter, instructions, affidavits, banking records, server logs, recordings, and a full evidence index tied to the box in my custody. Then open it. I cannot. "Nathaniel," my voice broke, "they are destroying me." His face changed then, just enough for me to see the grief beneath the law. "I know. Then why are we waiting?" "Because Eleanor's instructions are specific. The evidence is to be presented at the emergency succession meeting, in front of the full board, after Martin or Paige formally argues that you should be removed for financial misconduct. Not before, not privately, not in my office, in the room where they try to take everything from you." I stared at him, feeling the basement tilt around me. "So tomorrow," he nodded. "Tomorrow." The word landed like a sentence and a promise at the same time. Nathaniel slid another document across the table, not the sealed letter, but a copy of Eleanor's final directive to him. I read only a few lines before my eyes blurred. "Amelia must remain present. If they pressure her to leave, stop the vote. If they present forged records, request the screen stay active. If Martin claims authority as surviving spouse, proceed to Section 4. If Paige speaks on my behalf, play Recording 7. Recording 7. My mother had named their betrayals before they performed them. She had mapped the room from beyond the grave. Nathaniel placed a steady hand on the table, not touching me, but close enough that I understood he would not let me fall if I reached. "Listen carefully. Tomorrow, they will expect you to be frightened, ashamed, and alone. Let them expect it. Do not argue every lie. Do not chase every insult. Do not surrender your devices. Do not sign anything. Most importantly, do not leave the room before I open the box." I looked down at the brass key in my palm, the lighthouse shape pressed into my skin. "And if the board votes before you get there, they will not." "How can you be sure?" For the first time that night, Nathaniel Cross smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only strategy. "Because I already notified 2 people Eleanor trusted more than the board." Before I could ask who, footsteps sounded on the stairs above us. Nathaniel turned toward the door. The basement lights flickered once. Then Agent Maribel Stone, the same financial crimes investigator who had questioned me that morning, stepped into the room with rain on her coat and a sealed folder under her arm. By the next afternoon, I understood why Eleanor had told Nathaniel not to rescue me too early. There is a particular kind of confidence guilty people wear when they believe the victim has already been trained to lower her eyes. Martin wore it like a tailored suit. Paige wore it like perfume. They had arranged the Hartwell boardroom with the precision of an execution chamber, and when I walked in at 1:55 p.m., 5 minutes before the emergency succession meeting, every detail told me I was not expected to leave with anything except shame. The long mahogany table had been polished until the overhead lights reflected in it like cold water. Folders sat in front of every board member, each one marked confidential in red ink. A screen glowed at the far wall, already loaded with the same financial report Martin had used to poison Eleanor's memorial service. 2 security guards stood near the doors, pretending to be casual. Russell Keene sat beside Martin with the gray exhaustion of a man who had spent the morning deciding whether fear was safer than truth. Paige occupied Eleanor's old chair. That was the first thing I noticed, and for a moment all the instructions Nathaniel had given me nearly vanished beneath the heat in my chest. Eleanor's chair was high-backed, dark leather, worn slightly on the right arm where she used to tap her pen when she was thinking. Paige sat in it with her legs crossed, one hand resting lightly on Eleanor's old notebook, as if inheritance were something you could claim by touching furniture. She looked up when I entered, and the room did what rooms do when power has already been privately assigned. It went quiet, not out of respect, but anticipation. "Amelia," Paige said softly, "I am glad you came. You told me attendance was mandatory." "For now," Martin said from the head of the table. His voice was gentle enough for an audience. "Please sit." There was one chair left, halfway down the table. Not among family, not among leadership, but near the wall where staff usually sat to take notes. I sat because Nathaniel had told me to conserve my strength. Do not argue every insult. Do not chase every lie. Do not leave the room. Walter Hensley, the board chair, called the meeting to order with a voice that trembled under the weight of wanting the unpleasant part over quickly. He spoke about continuity, donor confidence, fiduciary responsibility, and the need to protect Eleanor Hart's legacy from reputational harm. Every phrase sounded as if Martin's attorney had written it before breakfast. Then Martin rose. He did not look at me at first. He looked at the board, the donors invited as observers, the foundation's senior staff, and the 2 reporters seated along the back wall. He had made sure this would be public enough to ruin me but formal enough to seem righteous. "No one in this room wanted this," he began. "Certainly not me. Eleanor loved Amelia deeply. At times, I think she loved her beyond reason, beyond prudence, beyond what was healthy for the foundation." I felt my fingers curl around the brass key in my pocket. Paige bowed her head, as if grieving Eleanor's foolish heart. Martin clicked a remote, and the screen changed to the first slide. My name appeared beside a list of payments to Harborline Logistics. "The documents before you show repeated unauthorized approvals connected to Amelia Hart's credentials. The diverted amount now stands at $1.87 million, with additional exposure possible. We have reason to believe internal files were copied, removed, or hidden in anticipation of discovery." That last sentence was aimed directly at me. Several board members turned. I said nothing. Agent Stone's warning echoed in my mind. "Preserve what you have, and be careful who knows you have it," Martin continued, growing more solemn with every lie. He described me as unstable after Eleanor's death, emotionally dependent, resistant to oversight. He suggested my childhood trauma had created a need to be indispensable. He said Eleanor's compassion had blinded her to warning signs. He did not call me orphan, thief, or fraud out loud, because men like Martin know that the cruelest words are often the ones they train other people to think for themselves. Then Paige stood. Her performance was quieter than his and therefore more dangerous. "I do not want to speak against Amelia," she said, though that was exactly why she had dressed in black and taken my mother's chair. "But my mother spent her life helping people who had lost everything. If Amelia used that mission to enrich herself, then staying silent would be another betrayal." She turned to me with eyes bright enough for cameras. "Please, Amelia, if any part of you loved her, do not make us drag this further." I could feel the room pressing toward me, waiting for collapse, apology, rage, anything they could label guilt. Instead, I looked at Walter Hensley. "Is Nathaniel Cross present?" Martin's expression barely moved, but his hand tightened around the remote. Walter blinked. "Mr. Cross was notified. That is not what I asked." Martin cut in before Walter could answer. "Nathaniel is no longer counsel for the Foundation's current executive leadership. His presence is not required for this internal governance matter. Eleanor's personal attorney is required when you are discussing her succession instructions," I said. Paige laughed under her breath. "There are no hidden instructions, Amelia. This is not one of Mom's rescue stories where the final truck appears at the last second." The door opened before I could answer. Nathaniel Cross stepped in carrying the sealed gray evidence box. Behind him came Agent Maribel Stone and a second investigator, a tall man with close-cropped hair and a navy suit. They did not announce themselves. They did not need to. The mood in the room shifted so quickly it was almost audible. Russell went pale. Paige sat back in Eleanor's chair as if someone had struck her. Martin's face held steady, but only because he had built it that way. "This is a closed board meeting," he said. Nathaniel set the evidence box on the table. The red wax lighthouse seal faced the room. Not according to Eleanor Hart's final directive. Walter stood halfway. "Nathaniel, perhaps we should discuss this privately." That option ended when Mr. Vale publicly accused Amelia of financial misconduct and moved to remove her from Foundation authority. Nathaniel opened his briefcase and removed a document thick with notarized pages. Eleanor was specific. Under Article 12 of the amended governance charter, any accusation of fraud against a named successor triggers immediate presentation of sealed succession evidence before the full board, with observers permitted if reputational claims have already been made publicly. Martin's attorney began flipping through his folder. "I have not seen any amended charter." "That," Nathaniel said, "is because Eleanor filed it with the state and with independent counsel after she discovered internal compromise." The word compromise landed like a match in dry grass. Agent Stone moved quietly to the back wall, where she could see every face. Nathaniel turned to me. "Amelia, do you have the key?" My fingers had gone numb around it. I stood, crossed the room, and placed the brass lighthouse key in his palm. For 1 second, his hand closed over mine, steady and warm. Then he unlocked the box. Inside was not a single dramatic letter, but order. Eleanor's order. Labeled folders, a small hard drive, printed bank records, affidavits, a sealed envelope, a flash drive marked Recording 7. Nathaniel lifted the first folder. Exhibit A, Harborline Logistics Vendor Registration, Cross, referenced with shell entities connected to Paige Vale through prior business filings and recovery email records. Paige shot to her feet. "That is ridiculous." Agent Stone wrote something down. Nathaniel lifted another folder. Exhibit B, payment routing showing relief funds transferred through subcontractor accounts and reclassified as consulting fees, property deposits, and private expenditures. Martin said, "This is speculation." Nathaniel did not look at him. Exhibit C, server access logs showing Amelia Hart's credentials were disabled before the disputed approvals were entered. The approvals were executed through an administrative override from a terminal assigned to Russell Keene. Every head turned toward Russell. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Martin spoke sharply. "Russell, say nothing." It was the first honest thing he had said all day, and he seemed to realize it too late. Nathaniel continued. Exhibit D, backup security footage from Bay 3, showing unmarked trucks removing foundation supplies after hours under the supervision of Martin Vale and Paige Vale. The screen at the far wall changed as Nathaniel's assistant connected the drive. Grainy footage appeared. Bay 3, midnight. 2 trucks, Paige in white sneakers, Martin near the office door, Russell standing beside him like a condemned man awaiting orders. The room erupted. Walter demanded the volume be lowered, though there was no volume. Celeste Monroe whispered, "Dear God." Luis, standing near the back with other staff, covered his mouth with one hand. Paige shouted that the footage was out of context. Martin said the shipments were special reallocations. Nathaniel waited until the noise weakened under its own panic. Then he lifted the sealed envelope. Before her death, Eleanor also recorded a sworn statement and wrote a final letter regarding succession. He broke the seal. My vision blurred when I saw my mother's handwriting. Not the public signature, not the elegant foundation script, but the quick slant she used when writing grocery lists, route notes, birthday cards, and messages on napkins when she thought of something important during dinner. Nathaniel read only the first lines aloud. If this letter is being opened, then Martin or Paige has accused Amelia of betraying the foundation. I am sorry, my lighthouse girl. I knew they might choose cruelty, but I also knew you would survive the truth better than they would survive evidence. Paige whispered, "Stop." Nathaniel inserted the flash drive marked Recording 7. For a moment, there was only a click, then static. Then Martin's voice filled the boardroom, clear and unmistakable. After Eleanor dies, we move quickly. Freeze Amelia out, flag the payments, and let the board think grief made her reckless. Paige's voice followed, lower but sharp. And if she fights? Martin laughed. She is adopted, emotional, and too attached to the mission. We will say she stole to prove she belonged. People will believe that before they believe Eleanor's husband robbed storm victims. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Agent Stone stood from the back of the room and closed her notebook. Martin looked at her, and for the first time since I had known him, there was no performance left on his face. Only fear. Fear changes people faster than grief ever could. Grief had made me quiet, hollow, careful with my breathing, but fear stripped Martin Vale down to the small, cornered man he had always been beneath the expensive suit and practiced sorrow. For one suspended second after his voice finished playing from the speaker, no one in the Hartwell boardroom moved. The recording seemed to remain in the air, repeating itself inside every face turned toward him. We will say she stole to prove she belonged. People will believe that before they believe Eleanor's husband robbed storm victims. Then the room came apart. Paige was the first to break. She stood so quickly Eleanor's chair rolled back and struck the wall. That was edited, she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. That is not what I meant. That is not the whole conversation. Martin turned on her with a look so sharp it silenced even the board members who had begun whispering. Sit down. No, she snapped, panic burning through all the polish. You said Nathaniel had nothing. You said the old woman was confused. You said Amelia would sign and disappear. The second she said it, she realized what she had done. So did everyone else. Agent Stone walked forward from the back wall with the calm patience of someone who had been waiting for truth to become careless. Miss Vale, she said, I would advise you not to continue unless you have counsel present. Paige's mouth opened, closed, and trembled. Martin raised both hands, not surrendering, performing. Even now, he reached for the shape of innocence. This has become emotional. Eleanor's death devastated all of us. Words spoken in private, under stress, can be misunderstood. I will not allow a grieving family dispute to be twisted into some theatrical ambush. Nathaniel Cross did not raise his voice. He did not have to. This is not a family dispute. This is a documented diversion of restricted disaster relief funds through shell vendors, forged digital approvals, falsified delivery records, and an attempted governance takeover based on fabricated misconduct. He placed another folder on the table, and Eleanor knew enough to notify state authorities before she died. Walter Hensley looked as if he might be sick. Before? Before, Nathaniel said. Agent Stone's office opened a preliminary inquiry 3 weeks before Eleanor's death. Amelia Hart was not the target. She was listed as a protected internal witness. The room turned toward me again, but this time the silence was different. Not accusation, not hunger, shock, shame, and something close to apology moved across the table in waves. Luis, still standing near the back with the staff, lowered his hand from his mouth and stared at me with wet eyes. Celeste Monroe pressed both palms against the table, as if steadying herself against a building that had just shifted on its foundation. Russell Keene began to cry. Not loudly, just a thin, broken sound that escaped before he could trap it. Martin looked at him. Russell. That single word carried a threat, but Russell had already crossed whatever line fear had drawn for him. He told me it was temporary, Russell said, looking at Agent Stone instead of Martin. He said, Mrs. Hart was losing capacity. He said Amelia was unstable. He said if I did not process the overrides, I would be implicated in earlier errors. I did not know it was this much money. I did not know they were going to frame her. Paige laughed once, a terrible, desperate sound. You knew enough to cash the bonus. Russell covered his face. Martin's attorney stood and muttered that his client would be making no further statements. But power had already left Martin's side of the table. You could feel it moving, like tidewater reversing under a bridge. Agent Stone and her partner began issuing instructions. Devices were to remain in the room. Foundation servers were to be preserved. No one was to delete, transfer, or alter records. Martin objected, then stopped when Agent Stone looked at him and said, Mr. Vale, obstruction would be an additional mistake. An additional mistake. After everything he had done, after every lie he had dressed in grief, that phrase landed with almost merciful restraint. Paige sank back into Eleanor's chair, but she no longer looked like someone claiming a throne. She looked like a child sitting somewhere she had been warned not to sit. Nathaniel turned back to the sealed envelope and removed the rest of Eleanor's letter. There is one more matter, he said. Martin's head lifted. For the first time, I saw real terror in his eyes. Not fear of prison, not fear of scandal, but fear of losing the thing he had wanted all along. Control, Nathaniel read from the document. 6 weeks before my death, I amended the succession structure of Hartwell Relief Foundation. These amendments were filed legally, witnessed independently, and activated upon either my death or my incapacity. My husband, Martin Vale, is not to serve as executive director, interim director, financial officer, board chair, or signatory on any foundation account. Paige Vale is not to hold a paid leadership role or donor-facing title. In the event of a dispute, Nathaniel Cross is empowered to present this directive and suspend compromised governance proceedings pending legal review. Walter gripped the edge of the table. And the successor? Nathaniel paused. Not for drama. For Eleanor. I knew him well enough by then to understand the difference. His voice softened when he continued. My successor is Amelia Hart. My name did not crash through the room. It settled. It settled over the accusations. Over the forged signatures. Over the years of little exclusions. Over every time Paige had called me a rescue project and Martin had called me staff. It settled like something that had always been true and had finally been read aloud. Not because she carries my blood, Nathaniel read, and my vision blurred, but because she carries the promise. Amelia knows what it means to wait in the dark for help that may not come. She knows that a relief box is not a box. It is a mother trying to keep her baby clean. It is an old man needing batteries for oxygen equipment. It is a family standing in a church gym with nothing left except the belief that strangers have not forgotten them. I have watched Amelia carry that belief farther than anyone else in my life. She is my daughter by choice, by law, by love, and by every storm we survived together. I pressed my hand to my mouth, but the sob came anyway. I had thought the evidence would save my name. I had not known Eleanor had left words to save the part of me that still wondered whether chosen love could be taken back by people who preferred bloodlines and signatures. Around the table, people began to stand. Celeste first, then Luis, then 2 warehouse coordinators, then Pastor Green. One by one, not in applause, not yet, but in recognition. Walter removed his glasses and wiped his face. Amelia, he said, his voice rough, I am ashamed. I wanted to hate him. A part of me did. But Eleanor had taught me that accountability mattered more than performance, and shame was only useful if it turned into repair. Then help clean up what you allowed, I said. He bowed his head. I will. Agent Stone's partner escorted Russell aside for a formal statement. Martin and Paige were not arrested in that room, not in handcuffs, not in the dramatic way people imagine justice arrives. Real justice is slower, more procedural, more careful with signatures than stories like to admit. But their devices were taken, their offices were sealed, their accounts were frozen pending review, their authority ended before they could walk out the door. Martin tried once more to look at me, as if he could still make me small, but something in me had changed while Eleanor's letter was being read. I did not look away. He left with his attorney. Paige followed, crying now without elegance, her mascara breaking the careful lines of her face. When she passed Eleanor's chair, she did not touch it. After they were gone, Nathaniel handed me the final page of the letter. I read it alone while the room moved around me in stunned fragments. My lighthouse girl, if this day has come, I am sorry for the pain required to reveal the truth. I know you wanted me to be safe more than you wanted to be right. But love does not always protect by preventing the storm. Sometimes it protects by teaching you where to stand when the storm arrives. Do not let bitterness inherit what I built for mercy. Open the warehouse. Feed people. Send the trucks. That is how we answer thieves. Not by becoming smaller, but by making the promise louder. 3 days later, under a bruised gray sky, Hartwell Relief Foundation reopened Bay 3. The same bay Martin and Paige had used in darkness now stood wide open in daylight. Volunteers checked pallets. Drivers signed real manifests. Donors arrived quietly, some with apologies, some with checks, some with both. I wore Eleanor's old rain jacket because the forecast warned of another coastal system forming offshore, and because grief, I had learned, could become armor if you stopped trying to take it off. Before the first truck pulled out, I stood at the loading dock with the brass lighthouse key in my hand and looked at the people waiting for instructions. For the first time since Eleanor died, I did not feel abandoned. I felt assigned. My mother used to say relief is a promise, I told them. Today, we keep it. The engine of the first truck turned over. Luis climbed into the driver's seat and gave me a nod. As the convoy rolled toward the coast, I looked up at the storm clouds gathering beyond Charleston Harbor and understood what Eleanor had known all along. Family is not proven by blood, by last names, by public speeches, or by who gets the front row seat at a memorial. Family is proven by who protects your name when you cannot defend it, who tells the truth when lies are easier, and who leaves you a lighthouse when the whole world goes dark. If this story touched you, tell me in the comments. Do you believe real family is made by blood, or by the people who stand beside you when everyone else turns away? And if you believe Eleanor was right, that love is a choice we prove through action, then share this story with someone who needs to remember they still belong, even after others tried to erase them.